Welcome to this meeting of the Subcommittee on 3 pieces of subsidiary legislation relating to implementation of MSW charging adjustment of construction waste disposal charges. We will carry out clause-by-clause scrutiny for all 3 subsidiary legislations today. Let me first welcome the government officials to join us. We have 2 hours today for this first meeting. I hope that we can complete the discussions on all policy matters within the first 1 hour and 45 minutes, and then we can focus on the legislations in the last 15 minutes. We're mainly looking at the adjustment of charges as we come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny, so there shouldn't be a lot of controversies. The main point is about whether the implementation of charging scheme can begin on the 1st of April next year. I hope we can finish the clause-by-clause examination today. Thank you. Let me first welcome government officials to join us. The administration can walk members through the content of the 3 subsidiary legislations. I'd like to let members know that Mr. Tony Che cannot attend today's meeting because of other engagements. He issued 2 letters respectively on November 1st and November 3rd to this subcommittee concerning some policy matters. I hope that after members have raised their questions, we can allow time for the administration to give a verbal response to Mr. Tony Che's questions. Administration. Good morning, members. The bill concerning MSW charging was passed in August 2021, and since then we've been working on the preparation for the implementation. We've decided that the implementation of the charging scheme for MSW can kickstart on the 1st of April next year. We have gazetted a notice appointing that the 1st of September 2022 can commence part of the provisions under the amendment ordinance. In relation to the uncommenced operations, on the 13th of October this year, the Secretary for Environment and Ecology made a notice on the commencement of the uncommenced provisions, appointing the 1st of April next year to be the commencement date of the uncommenced provisions covering penalty, defenses, etc. Currently, the construction waste disposal charges at landfill sites is $200 per ton. After the implementation of MSW charging, the gate fee will be $360 per ton. To avoid anyone deliberately mixing construction waste and household waste, after the implementation of the MSW, the administration will adjust the construction waste charge and we have consulted the panel on environmental affairs on the adjustment of the charges. And we have amended the schedules for the construction waste disposal charges. This includes landfill charge, sorting charge, as well as public field charge. And this will kickstart or come into operation on the 1st of April next year. Through negative vetting on the 18th of October this year, the subsidiary legislation has been tabled to the Legislative Council. Also, on the 20th of May 2022, we've also gazetted a notice concerning the specification requirement of designated bags and labels. Last June, we conducted an open tender exercise for manufacturing contracts of the designated bags. However, the tendering prices were much higher than what we expected, so we revised the specifications of designated bags to control the production cost of the designated bags. The revision includes using high-density polyethylene instead of low-density polyethylene to produce designated bags that are less thick for 3-liter to 75-liter capacities. And also, we adjusted the requirement for the recycled materials content in designated bags from 50% to not less than 20% to provide greater flexibility to manufacturers for controlling production costs. On the terms of tenders as well as the specifications, we consulted the subcommittee under the EA panel this year. To reflect the specification changes, on the 20th of October 2023, the administration gazetted the notice, and through negative vetting, the amendments had been tabled to the Legislative Council. The above concerns the content of the 3 subsidiary legislations. I'm happy to take questions from members. Thank you. 6 members have pressed the button to speak. They are Mr. Chen Xiu-hong, Mr. Andrew Lam, Mr. Vincent Cheng, Ms. Elizabeth Kwok, Mr. Dennis Leung, and myself. We have plenty of time now, so 5 minutes questions and answers included. I hope you can stick to the 5-minute time frame. Mr. Chen Xiu-hong will go first. Thank you, Chair. In July, during the meeting at the panel on environmental affairs, we've discussed this, that is concerning the implementation date of the MSW charging scheme. It was said that we want to have enough time for the public to adapt to the charging scheme. There were 2 dates proposed, that is the 1st of April next year. And the Secretary mentioned that he wouldn't rule out the option of having a 6-month phase-in period. That is, after the implementation of the charging scheme comes into effect, the government will give 6 months to the public to adapt to it, and during the 6-month period, verbal warnings will be given to those who do not comply with the charging scheme. During the meeting at the panel, the Secretary said he was confident that the 6-month phase-in period would not be extended repeatedly. He was confident that members of the general public would be able to adapt to the charging scheme. I want to know, after we've had the discussion in July, I wonder for public housing estates, 3 new buildings, and buildings with property management companies, are they ready for the charging scheme? What is your analysis on that? Also, I understand that the waste construction disposal charges have to be adjusted because you want to prevent people from dumping household waste at landfill sites because of the price differences between the construction waste disposal as well as household waste disposal. I understand this, but what I am concerned about is Mr. Luke mentioned about designated bags. I understand that HDPE will be adopted for the new type of designated bags after the specification is revised. Would it have enough loading capacity if HDPE is used instead? I had a talk with the administration last time, and it was said that testing would be carried out. I want to know, after the testing, how confident is the administration about the loading capacity of the newly designed designated bags? 2 questions, administration. I thank Mr. Chen for the questions. We've talked about the 6-month phase-in period. We want the public to adapt to the charging scheme, and it takes time. For other jurisdictions, it took them a few years for people to get used to the charging scheme. So during the initial phase of the charging scheme, we will focus on publicity work and education campaign. And if needed, we would extend the phase-in period or adaptation period. The purpose is to give the public more time to adapt to the charging scheme. If someone do not comply with the charging scheme, say they do not put on a designated label on the bags, then we would give verbal warnings first. If we notice that such non-compliance keeps happening, we will take enforcement action. We have to emphasize that during the first 6 months or first year of the implementation of the charging scheme, we would focus our efforts on educating the public. We'll have to keep delivering the right messages to the public so that people will have enough time to get used to the charging scheme. Understand that it will take time. Honestly speaking, if you ask me what to expect on the 1st of April next year after the implementation of the charging scheme, it's hard to say. It boils down to how people can adapt to the charging scheme, how they use the designated bags. But we've been doing the preparatory work for the charging scheme. As well as for the materials of HDPE, yes, we've revised the specification of the designated bags. For the tendering exercise, we conducted testing ourselves to make sure that the newly designed bags wouldn't be worn out easily, so that it can properly contain the waste. We have done this testing before we included the terms of tender documents. On the testing, I wonder if you have carried out specific testing based on your revised specifications. Say, residents dispose of metal waste into the designated bags, and when the bags are dumped to the garbage room, the bags may break and the metal waste or metal cans may be all over the floor. I'll ask my colleague to talk about the testing we did. Apart from what the Deputy Director mentioned about the testing we did before we rolled out the tender documents, in August we asked the tenders to create some samples, and we asked the authorized labs to carry out testing, and we did durability testing to see how malleable or how elastic the bags are. We also did waterproof testing to make sure that the bags are waterproof. We also tried poking the bags to see whether it's strong enough to contain the MSW. And the bags meet international standards. For durability tests, it complies with the ASTM D882 tests or standards. As for the other testing, they comply with the EM1393 standards. Next, Mr. Andrew Lam.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are in relation to the period from now until 1st of April. Many people are concerned about 3 new buildings and houses or residential properties in rural areas. So my questions are in relation to that. I do appreciate the fact that enforcement will still be conducted in the adjustment period, because otherwise a wrong message may be conveyed that for the adjustment period nothing has changed. But when it comes 1st of April, if you have all the facilities in place, as well as monitoring measures. For the enforcement process, for those who are breaking the law inadvertently, if they have one designated bag and a non-designated bag, would you allow that? I want to know what kind of preparatory work you've done in relation to the enforcement. Thank you. Deputy Director, please. Thank you. Of course, enforcement action will be taken if necessary. Right now, we have the EPD and the FEHD conducting enforcement with their own approaches. They will find those who are not compliant. For example, illegally disposing waste. We will also install cameras in hygiene black spots to collect data. And for the EPD, we will collect evidence inside buildings. So we already liaise with property management companies on this. We do not want to cause any conflicts between them and residents. So when property management companies find out that there are often breaches in a certain level or in a certain location, then they can notify us for enforcement. For the actual enforcement process, we will have dedicated teams. We will have additional manpower to carry out education as well. But they may have to conduct inspections first. When they see illegal disposal of waste, they will issue a verbal advice and then they'll educate the relevant member of the public on this. So at first I did say the focus would be on education and publicity. For PRH estates, as there are quite a lot of people living there, we do not want residents to feel it is difficult to purchase bags, so selling points will be set up at PRH estates to sell designated bags. To facilitate residents in 3 new buildings PRH estates as well as those in rural areas, we will distribute designated bags to them to facilitate their waste disposal. Thank you. Sorry, I have a follow-up, Chair. Of course, I do support the department's initiative to publicize and educate the initiative, but I am worried about the enforcement process. In my experience, especially those living in older districts or PRH estates, when they have a podium outside, from what I heard, often people would be dumping waste in the podium. I think it is a habit of public residential housing estate residents to throw things into light well. People can just dump waste at will even now. So how can you make sure they will do that in future? Have you installed cameras? Are you just issuing verbal advice to them for now? Thank you. Well, in relation to the question for 3 new buildings, it is indeed quite complicated with the enforcement because people would dump waste, as you said, in the light well. The departments have been working on that, especially the FEHD has been conducting cleaning operations. Depending on the actual circumstances, we will continue to liaise with the 2 departments to see how things can be handled. Well, you can speak at a second round. Let's have Mr. Vincent Ching ask his questions. Well, actually, don't worry, Mr. Andrew Lam. I will follow up on your questions. And that's because Many members are concerned about how this is handled in future. And I have a recollection of this, that we have been discussing this in depth before. We are, of course, worried about the enforcement after 1st of April. In relation to the preparatory work and publicity, I actually just came from Shamshui before the meeting. And I can see that the hygiene condition has indeed improved. One was due to the operation taken by the Deputy Chief Secretary, and that there are now harsher penalties for littering from $1,500 to $3,000. But in my understanding, with the MSW charging the fines, the maximum penalties would still be $1,500. So I want to ask about the enforcement. Of course, you said that the FAHD would be responsible for those on the streets. So for littering, you would be fined $3,000, but for the illegal disposal of waste, they would only be fined $1,500. Would it be confusing to members of the public? Would you consider amending the legislation to plug this loophole? In relation to distribution of designated bags, now, for those receiving CSSA or old age living allowance, they will receive a subsidy for that. How can members of the public actually get that subsidy? And will you publicize the arrangement for the distribution of designated bags? Thank you. Deputy Director, please. Thank you. For the MSW charging, there are two parts to the enforcement process. One, the disposal of waste will be undertaken in the buildings or at designated spots. So the bags would either have to be designated bags, or the bags would have to be affixed with designated labels. So if one disposes waste in a public street, that would still be littering, so one would be fined $3,000. But as I said, if there is non-compliant depositing of waste, that would be fine. One would be fined $1,500. I don't think there's any confusion in that. Now, as the member said, an additional subsidy will be provided for those receiving CSSAs or OALA to purchase designated bags, and I believe that amount will be adjusted annually, and we have consulted the relevant panel on this on a certain date, and once we have consulted the panel, we will adjust the allowance amounts to add the subsidies. As for the arrangement for the distribution of bags, for the first 6 months, we will distribute to residents of PRH estates through new buildings, as well as those living in rural areas. Designated bags, we are thinking about having a logistics company distribute the bags to the households, or we will mail cards to the residents, and with those cards they can collect designated bags. The letter method will be simpler, but as you know, for older districts, they have a letterbox shared by many residents. If we employ a logistics company, it will be more targeted, but we are also concerned about people not being at home to receive the designated bags. So I'm thinking we can probably adopt the approach that we had for anti-epidemic goods. If the people aren't at home at that point, we'll issue a card and they can go collect the bags at a certain place. Well, we're not far from April. I can still see multiple problems, including the difference in fines between littering and this. I think there may still be confusion. Of course, I also want to expedite the publicizing of arrangements because as I said earlier, we're not far from April. So I just want to clarify that you do not plan on changing the fines for this from $1,500 to $3,000. I think because it is not clearly defined. So when one dumps waste close to the trash bin, will it be considered littering or the illegal depositing of non-compliant waste? Well, in fact, trash bins aren't one of the designated spots for MSW, so or refuse collection points. They are not designated spots for MSW either, so that would constitute littering. Well, so for those people dumping on trash bins, they would constitute littering, but for those dumping at RCPs, it would be under this regulation. Well, next, Ms. Municipal Court, please. Thank you, Chair. As said earlier, we're not far from April, and the department said they have been advocating the initiatives of MSW charging, but I do not see a lot of publications myself, and many members of public are quite concerned. So with such a tight time frame, when will you start the publicity and education campaign? Many members of the public have many questions. Would you have a hotline or a dedicated website so as to facilitate members of the public to find some answers to the frequently asked questions? Because otherwise, many members of the public would just come to us to ask questions. I hope that you can do better in terms of preparatory work, because some questions may be technical and there may be different scenarios to questions, and we may not be able to give good answers to the questions as a result. Can you give a time frame for when the publicity and education campaign will start? And I want to ask about the $10 subsidy arrangement for the purchase of designated bags. Is it after the 6-month adjustment period that you'll have that $10 subsidy? Well, actually, it will start on the 1st of April despite the 6-month adjustment period. But for those receiving CSSA, some of them may not be living in the PRH estates or rural areas or 3 new buildings, so they may not benefit from the distribution of designated bags. That's why we are implementing this $10 subsidy from 1st of April. And we have started our publicity campaign in August this year. We have some radio and television announcements as well as some ads in MTR stations or public transportation. Our publicity campaign is mainly about promoting the fact that MSW charging will start on 1st of April, and we are also advocating that you should dump less to save more. And we'll soon start the second phase of the publicity campaign. With this second phase, we'll have details about arrangements as to how you'll need a designated bag, where you should dump the bag, and this will start in mid-November. And in mid-November, for certain targeted groups such as foreign domestic helpers and elderly persons, we will have specific publicity efforts. We will work with influencers to publicize the initiative on social media platforms. We will also have ads in television programs that elderly persons would often watch to promote the initiative, so that people are familiar with the arrangements to be implemented starting from 1st of April. In the third phase, 2 months before the implementation of MSW charging, we'll tell people where to buy designated bags. We have been working with supermarkets and large retailers. Right now, there are 2,000 odd retail outlets as well as 9 online platforms that will sell the designated bags. And this third stage will start in February, because if we are giving all the information in one go, we think members of the public may not be able to take all that in. So we're doing it progressively to promote to members of the public such arrangements. And we will continue our publicity campaign to the end of next year. And if necessary, we'll extend the publicity campaign, because this is a long-term policy. But this is our publicity plan at the moment. And we already have a website in place. There is information on the charging, some best practice guides for the industries involved. We already have a hotline at the moment, and we are receiving 600 odd calls every day. I believe with the further progression of publicity plans, we'll have more people asking questions. Thank you.
Can you tell us the phone number? 2838 3811. 2838 3811. I think you have to step up your publicity work. Are there any publicity campaigns targeting domestic helpers, foreign domestic helpers? We will produce videos telling foreign domestic helpers what to do. The videos may not be in specific languages that foreign helpers speak, but there will be translation for particular sectors, for industrial buildings, wet markets, and for drivers of refuse collection vehicles. We produce videos targeting these different groups of people as well. There may be foreign workers at different restaurants as well, and we are producing videos for these people too. Where are you going to release the videos? On our website, and for specific industry associations, we're going to, through these associations, release these videos to their members. We're also in talks with associations of drivers for refuse collection vehicles, and we are going to release the videos to them as well. How are you going to reach out to foreign domestic helpers so that they can see the videos? Well, through general consulates as well as different organizations, we're going to release the message. For elderly people, say for some popular radio programs, we will insert advertisements in the programs for elderly people. If you release the videos to companies hiring foreign domestic helpers, that would do, I believe. Mr. Dennis Leung. We have to tackle the issues of municipal solid waste in Hong Kong. We have to stick to the polluter pays principle to levy charges for MSW. As Deputy Director said, we have to dump less to save more. Another question is, we have to reduce waste and we have to do better in recycling. Currently, in housing estates, food waste collection has not been very popular, both in public and private housing estates. I want to ask the administration, how are you going to promote food waste recycling and collection in housing estates to reduce food waste? I'd like to learn more in this area. Second question about non-compliances. Deputy Director mentioned that he will deploy extra manpower. Are you going to use existing manpower and deploy them to enforce the law. You want to ensure smooth implementation of the charging scheme, then you'll have to make sure you take enforcement actions. How are you going to conduct investigations? In public housing estates, they have garbage bins on each floor. Say people, they get plastic bags from wet markets and they may just dispose of the waste in the waste collection bins at staircase landing. How are you going to solve all these issues? We are yet to receive a comprehensive response from the administration on how it's going to tackle these issues. Thirdly, on interdepartmental coordination, EPD as well as housing departments and other government departments, how are you going to work together to make sure smooth implementation of the charging scheme on the 1st of April next year? Previously, it was said that the FEHD's refuse collection points will be converted to a station where there will be waste recycling points. What is the progress on that? Thank you. Deputy Director. I thank Mr. Leung for the questions. On food waste collection, we've been taking forward the initiative on different fronts. Currently, we have a few food waste collection contracts. We are collecting food waste at different points. First, in a couple of districts including Tuen Mun, Tai Po, Sha Tin, etc., we are collecting food waste. At places where there are many restaurants, we deploy vehicles to collect food waste every day. We go to each restaurant to encourage restaurant owners to recycle food waste. And we deploy vehicles to collect these food waste. We hope that by the middle of next year, we will be able to launch this restaurant food waste collection campaign in all districts. Also, we've talked to restaurant owners and asked them to place recycling bins in their restaurants so that they have a place where they can dispose of their food waste. For public housing estates, we have installed smart bins in 100 public housing estates. We are ahead of our schedule by 6 months. As mentioned in the policy address, by next year, we will expand this food waste collection scheme to all public housing estates in Hong Kong and will install smart bins in all public housing estates. Through a collection fund, people can apply for subsidies to install smart bins for private housing estates. There will be funds to subsidize private housing estates to install smart bins. We have the food waste contracts. So if private housing estates are willing to install smart recycling bins, we'll be willing to collect the food waste. For large-scale housing estates, the property management companies there would love to have the smart bins installed, but the owners are not willing to. So there are some difficulties. We hope to motivate owners to install smart recycling bins at their housing estates. As long as there are smart recycling bins, we'll be willing to collect food waste. As for enforcement action, we've been talking to Housing Department and FEHD, especially the Housing Department, because they are managing many public housing estates. Currently, for each household, there is on their floor a recycling bin or a garbage bin for people to dispose of compliant waste. As for non-compliant waste, they will dispose of the waste in another cycling bin or refuse bin downstairs. So workers will have an idea of how many non-compliant waste there are, and we will, in accordance with the situation, take enforcement action. For refuse collection points, in the long run, we'd love to add more recycling facilities. There are such recycling facilities in some new refuse collection points. We've been talking to FEHD to put up trials. We want to make good use of our refuse collection points so that there can be recycling facilities at these stations. Thank you. Members, we are going to discuss the commencement date of the charging scheme for MSW as well as the adjustment of construction waste disposal charges. We have already passed the bill. For questions that have been raised in the Bills Committee or at the panel, I don't think we need to repeat them here. Perhaps we can focus on how the government is going to implement the charging scheme and what has happened in the interim period after the bill has passed and before the charging scheme is going to take effect. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung. Thank you, Chair. Understand that the discussion scope is actually quite focused. For waste separation and waste reduction, we want to have a comprehensive view on how the government is going to take forward the initiative. So that's why we've been discussing various issues this morning. The paper mentions that 1st of April next year is appointed as the commencement date of the charging scheme because there will be the Chinese New Year holiday and there will be a lot of waste generated during the Chinese New Year and there won't be enough manpower during the Chinese New Year to collect waste. That's why the 1st of April is appointed. However, it seems like the progress is not as good as we expected. We set up a subcommittee to discuss the issue previously. Members had noticed that the government could have done more. Currently, the government is focusing on paper waste, plastic waste, metal cans, etc. However, I think the government can cover other types of waste. Legislative Council members have been to the South Korea and Taiwan as well as Japan for duty visits. I wonder if the government can do more before the implementation of the MSW charging scheme. I understand that the government will upgrade the refuse collection points. What is the progress? How many refuse collection points have you converted? I want to have a clear timetable from the administration. Coming back to the subsidiary legislation for construction waste disposal charges, the charges will be increased from $200 to $365 per ton. I understand that the government wants to deter people from taking advantage of the current price differences. We have had this discussion at the panel. However, I find it weird that there is not much mentioning after the adjustment of the waste construction disposal charges, what will be the impacts on the construction sector? I haven't seen any relevant figures or statistics yet. On the impacts on the construction sector, I want to know more. I want to have more information. I also want to ask about the public field reception fee or the public field charge. What is its relation with the MSW charging scheme? Can you elaborate, please? Thank you.
Deputy Director, I think the last part of the question is relatively innovative is a relatively innovative question. I'll let my colleague talk about that in particular. In relation to the construction waste disposal charge, we have been charging that since 2006. Right now, we have a 93% recycling rate. According to figures in the 2021, we have 53,000 tons of waste per day, and 21,000 tons of them will be recycled in other construction sites, and 27,000 of them will be reused at public free reception facilities. So essentially 90% of the construction waste will be recycled. So from the increase from $71 to $87 is not that high. And most of those in the construction industry are already paying this charge, and this is just a minor part of their cost. We believe the impact will be minimal to the construction industry. Now, with the increase from $71 to $87 is mainly due to cost consideration, that is to break even the cost. So you are breaking even by increasing the charge from $71 to $87. So this is not related to MSW charging. Okay. In relation to the landfill charge, is it the case that because most of the waste will be recycled, there will not be much in landfill charge, correct? As for refuse collection points, our new refuse collection points will be at Hongshui Q and Anderson Road. They will have some recycling facilities incorporated in the refuse collection points. We have to work with the FEHD, and the FEHD has to think about where to put them, because often they are already quite full of facilities in the refuse collection points. So they have identified several options, and we'll follow up on that. In the new refuse collection points, the design would already have recycling facilities incorporated. As for the types of recyclables at Green at a Community, we already have 9 types of recyclables. So we have over 160 recycling stores to collect such recyclables, and next year we'll introduce a bill into the LegCo requiring all buildings that have property management companies to have recycling systems in their buildings, whether it's recycling bags or recycling bins. We hope that it would make it more convenient for residents to recycle. Thank you. Of course, we know that there will be 2 new large refuse collection points. But from what I remember, some of the existing refuse collection points will be upgraded or refurbished. From what I know, the refuse collection point in Java Road in North Point, they have a compactor fitted into it. It's very large, and they can manage to do that. Is it the case that for all refuse collection points that is possible to it is possible to do that, you would do that in future? Well, we have identified 2 or 3 refuse collection points to see if it is possible to do something similar, and we consider how to incorporate recycling features in other refuse collection points. Well, I think the questions raised by the Mr. Kwok Kern should be asked at a panel on food and environmental hygiene instead. I can pass this on to the chairman of the panel to follow up on that. Well, next it would be me. I'll speak for 5 minutes. I would first like to thank the government for its efforts. We have come a long way. We were planning to commence the MSW charging on 1st of January. However, due to manpower shortage, the lack of public motivation to comply with such arrangements during Chinese New Year, and so on, that the date of implementation has been pushed back to 1st of April. I think that is a consensual decision. I do not object to that. The government has also talked about the illegal disposal of waste on sea. Of course, we do not want to cause any environmental pollution. However, I want to say on record here during a public meeting, I want to ask the government, so from now until 1st of April or from 1st of April for 6 months after that during the adjustment period, how can you make sure that there will not be illegal disposal of waste on sea? Will you work with the AFCD or the Marine Department to make sure that won't happen? Will you have some facilities near the sea should there be illegal disposal of waste to recycle waste at sea? Because of course we do not want fishermen to bear the costs. For 3 new buildings and for those living in rural areas, it is difficult for them. You said you would distribute designated bags, or you would mail cards to them for them to collect designated bags. But for 3 new buildings, those without property management companies, it's still quite difficult. Would you have care teams help them with that? What are your thoughts on that? Will you be able to do anything before 1st of April for fishermen? As the chair said, we have consulted the fishermen's associations. Of course, the waste that they generate will need to be contained in green bags. For the waste that they is dumped at sea, we'll have dedicated teams for that. So we have different bags for that. In future, fishermen can use the designated bags for their own waste, and then they can use other bags for the waste at sea, and the Marine Department will hand it over to the waste collector to deal with that. And we would treat such waste as exempted from charges because it is only waste collected by the fishermen. It's not waste generated by them. So fishermen only have to put their own waste in the green bags, and they would have done what they have to do under the MSW charging scheme. And in this month, actually, we will have a meeting with the Heng Cook to talk about recycling or collection of waste in rural areas. We will definitely need the help of Heng Cook, and we have been listening to their comments in relation to how this is to be handled in a particular village. We will definitely flesh out the details with Heng Cook. As for who is going to distribute the designated bags, at first we wanted to go with the care teams, and we have liaised with the 2 care teams in Chun Wan and Southern District. They said their work would be quite busy, so we may not have them help with that. But with all the care teams in place, we will definitely ask them to help us with at least the promotion of MSW charging, and for certain households they can help with the distribution as well. For certain villages, if they don't have village offices, we can perhaps have such bags being sold or being collected at food kiosks. I think you need to really talk about that with the care teams. They can't just work for free for them. You may need pay some kind of compensation for them. As also for fishermen, how are you going to implement the arrangements to facilitate fishermen to convey bags to fishermen's markets. Well, right now we're thinking about having some sort of vending machines for designated bags at fishermen markets to facilitate fishermen. Well, I think this is about time for me. We have all members who have asked the first round. We have 4 members waiting to speak for the second round. Mr. Chan Soo-hong, Mr. Andrew Lam, Ms. Elizabeth Court, and Mr. Lettuce Leung. Again, 5 minutes per member, and I will make sure this time limit is strictly complied with on this round. Mr. Chan Soo-hong, please. Thank you. After the bill has been passed, the industries and members of the public are quite concerned about how MSW charging is to be implemented so as to avoid any confusion or conflicts. So there will be designated outlets selling the designated bags and labels. But from what I understand, the government would also allow private residential developments to purchase multiple designated bags or designated labels for distribution in the private housing estates. But there may be exceptions. For example, if the households need more than one bag or several bags, people can only purchase the designated bags at the designated outlets. But then disputes may arise between property management companies and residents. Residents may wonder, why can't I purchase additional designated bags from the management offices instead? Is it illegal for the management office to be a designated outlet? Would it be possible to distribute more designated bags to property management companies? So this is what I heard from property management companies. What does the department think about that? Deputy Assistant Director, please. Thank you, Chair. There are several ways that one can purchase designated bags. One can purchase bags at supermarkets or management offices. It is not illegal for a management company to sell additional bags to residents, because one of the terms in the legislation is that with a stipulated cleansing service agreement, a management company can sell designated bags at the designated price, but only at the designated price. Sorry, I have another question. With the designated outlets, whether it's through a management office, well, actually, I'm talking about the management offices that are distributing bags in batches to residents on a preset arrangement. If they charge for additional bags, will it be a breach of the legislation? Well, it will not breach of the legislation. With the approval of the director, it can be a designated outlet. We're talking about supermarkets, pharmacies, or online platforms. So for these, they would require the approval of the director. But for property management companies, for security guards, they may need to provide cleansing services. And they can sell designated bags at designated prices to residents, because they are to provide cleansing services to residents, and this complies with the legislation. Well, just a brief question. I want to know how the department will deal with trash contained in well-wrapped bags, and apparently it is said that property management companies can use a transparent plastic bag to contain all the green bags disposed of by residents. Now, are there any additional conditions for that? Well, it's just, even though it is in the bill, please answer that question. we want to make sure the bag is transparent because we want to see the bags. There are no additional requirements in the legislation for that. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Andrew Lam. Thank you, Chair. On three new buildings and village houses in remote rural areas. I think the responses from administration makes me feel not very confident. Understand that you should arrest the people who do not comply with the regulations. There are people living in three new buildings. There are also 1,500 people who are homeless. How are you going to deal with these cases? If you're going to fine these people $3,000, it's going to be tragic for them. There are also ethnic minority people in the communities. That's why I feel that you have to strengthen your educational efforts as well as your supervisory work and your supervision. I think we all have similar questions in mind. That's why it took us 2 years to pass the bill. There is still time before the 1st of April. Will you, say in February or March, come back to the Legislative Council to respond to these questions from members? I don't think the administration can give us a response now. Deputy Director, we are happy to update members on the progress of our preparatory work at different points of time, especially before the 1st of April next year. The chairperson of the panel on environmental affairs is here. Yes, Ms. Elizabeth Quat. I'm also concerned about three new buildings as well as village houses in remote rural areas. Currently, in three new buildings, on the rooftops, in the back staircases, there are piles of garbage and the hygiene conditions there are very poor. We are worried that people would dump their household waste in the yards or in the rooftops. How is the government going to deal with this situation? I hope you can look into it. My question is this. There were discussions that in supermarkets, a bag or a plastic bag can be used for two purposes. We have come to phase 2 of the charging scheme for shopping bags. And the money charged for shopping bags has become a revenue for retail outlets or supermarkets. Understand that manufacturers have sold more shopping bags to supermarkets or other retail outlets because this will be one of the sources of revenue for retail outlets. So we are not giving enough incentives to people to not use shopping bags because the cost may just be a penny for manufacturers to manufacture these shopping bags. Some members of the public told me that they find it unfair for supermarkets to generate income or revenue from selling shopping bags or from charging customers for getting shopping bags. If we are implementing the scheme on the 1st of April, will supermarkets still sell these shopping bags to their customers? How should they deal with the revenue generated from selling shopping bags? Should this revenue be passed to the government? Say supermarkets may sell lots of shopping bags. What about the shopping bags they had previously distributed? Deputy Director, we encourage supermarkets to give customers a choice Say some people may spend $1 to get a shopping bag or spend a designated amount to get a designated bag. This is up to the public to decide. We just feel that if, say, a customer is going to the supermarket and he or she is going to get a shopping bag anyway, we encourage such customer to get the green bag instead of the plastic bag. The green bag will be set at a certain level of amount. So the revenue generated from selling these green bags will have to be given to the government. We've implemented the charging scheme for shopping bags for some time now, and the feedback we get is that retail outlets are distributing 60% less in terms of shopping bags or plastic bags. So the $1 levy is actually working. For some people, before they pay the $1 to get the plastic bag, they think before they pay for the shopping bag. So they may end up bringing their recycling bag. And we ask the retail outlets to keep the amounts they receive for charging customers of the shopping bags. When we have the relevant data in hand, we will release it in due course. Thank you. Mr. Dennis Leung, the administration didn't reply to my question just now. For people who dispose of their waste without using the designated bags, say they use their own shopping bags and they do not dispose it in their own housing estates, and they bring the waste to, say, rubbish bins on the street, what will the government do? I wonder if garbage will end up piling or end up being piled up on the street. How can the government do better in educating the public to follow the set procedures and dispose of their household waste and their housing estates instead of on the street? The government will have to tell the public clearly what the government will do to enforce the law to prevent non-compliance cases. There were similar questions raised just now concerning publicity work. Deputy Director, please tell us what you will do in the coming months to prevent non-compliances. For people who illegally dump waste, it will be $3,000 fine. And if you get a designated bag, it will just be about a few pennies. That's $1.5. People can weigh whether they want to pay $3,000 fine or pay $1.5 to get a designated bag in the long run. Chair, the question is, people are not trying to avoid buying bags. It's just that they are very eco-friendly and they have lots of shopping bags at home and they want to reuse these recycling bags or shopping bags, and every time when they dump their waste they use these shopping bags. And if they cannot use these shopping bags, they will just dump the waste on the street. They think they are very eco-friendly. That's a problem that we see in the community. So how would the government deal with it? Ms. Kwok asked you about using the shopping bag for two purposes. When will you roll out the scheme? Will you roll out the scheme on the 1st of April next year? Will you ask elderly people to use up all their shopping bags accumulated at home? If you allow people to use the shopping bag for two purposes, then elderly people can be eco-friendly and at the same time save some money. So the question from Mr. Dennis Leung is valid. Starting from February, these designated bags will be sold, and supermarkets will have a choice for their customers. Customers can either buy the green bag or spend $1 to get a shopping bag. So you still have 2 months. You will have a 2-month grace period to use up the shopping bags accumulated. I see some members there are new members joining us in the meeting. If there are no further questions, we'll come to the by cross-examination. Well, I have actually a follow-up question. Mr. Vincent Chang asked about law enforcement, and the administration said it has to do with educating the public, and even after a 6-month phase-in or adaptation period, the government will focus on giving verbal warnings to people who do not comply with the regulations, unless there are repeated offenses or offenders. I think it has to do with how you draft the provisions. Are you going to exercise discretion? Say after the 6-month phase-in period, and you do not enforce the law, then we may be pressured by the public. Law is law. You may exercise discretion, but you'll have to draw a line somehow. Will you have the relevant guidelines ready? Or will you start drafting your guidelines starting from the 1st of April? Can you tell us more about how you're going to enforce the law? Law enforcement agency has the discretion to decide whether they will enforce the law. Say if we decide to extend the adaptation period to a year, then we will perhaps publish a press release to tell people that we're only going to give verbal warnings. Say if we are going to enforce the law, we will publish notice or will publish press release to tell the public that we are going to start really enforcing the law. I hope that when we're closer to the 1st of April next year, you will tell us again what you're going to do. Members are really concerned about having garbage piling up on the street. I'm concerned about the situation at 3 new buildings as well as village houses in the remote rural areas. There may be people who drive their cars and dump waste illegally somewhere. I want some statistics and figures from the administration to see there will be an increase of non-compliances. Last question from Ms. Elizabeth Quart, 3 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask about the situation at subdivided units. A lot of the SDUs are situated in 3 new buildings. Within one apartment, there are quite a number of subdivided units. So how are you going to collect waste in these 3 new buildings with subdivided units? Have you taken into account of this? Deputy Director. We may ask contractors from the logistics sector to, say, do a survey in these buildings to get an idea of how many households there are in these buildings. We will, through our contractors, do the survey. We hope to distribute the designated bag to each household. Say if we knock on the doors and no one answers the door, we'll think of ways to distribute the bag and then through another means. Say, can we ask the public to go pick up the designated bags at one collection point? We'll think about that. We want to ensure that each household to get the designated bag. Perhaps you can do a survey to have an idea of how many subdivided unit tenants there are in Hong Kong. Understand that you're going to ask your contractors to visit the 3 new buildings and knock on people's doors. Are you going to distribute the amount of designated bags people will need in 6 months' time? Or are you going to distribute it one by one? There are so many 3-nil buildings in Hong Kong. How much money are you going to spend on hiring contractors to do it? And what time would the contractors go to these households? A lot of people have to go to work during the day. So how many times do you have to pay the visit in order to make sure that people get the designated bags? Deputy Director or Director.
Thank you. Well, we are asking the bags to be distributed between 12 to 9 p.m. and maybe during the weekends. They said they would wait at the gate for a while because some people may not be able to get to the door quickly. As for the quotations, it would depend on the arrangement adopted, whether it's door-to-door distribution or the leaving of cards or a combined approach. From the quotations, if we distribute 6 months worth of bags, this will be the most cost-effective option. But as the Deputy Director said, we'll do more research, and in December or January we'll have colleagues conduct surveys. Well, contractors conduct surveys to see how the situation is in 3 new buildings, because there may be subdivided units behind the door of a unit, so we may not be able to distribute bags into each of the units. So once we have conducted a survey, we will determine on the price. Well, the survey will be completed in December or January because there are 3,000 or 3 new buildings, but it actually doesn't take that long. The contractor would do a survey to see how many entrances there are. Some have residential units behind their offices, and there are also hairdressers or other shops that will also distribute bags or conduct a survey with them. So when will you decide on which approach to take, that is the door-to-door distribution or the leaving of cards? Well, can you provide the details to us in December or January? So you will need to report your progress in January to the panel on food and environmental hygiene. Is it the case that similar arrangements will be adopted in rural areas? For those answers, for those questions that are unanswered, I would ask them to give us a reply after the meetings. Well, they did talk about liaising with Hung Yee Cook and other bodies to flesh out the arrangements for rural areas. I believe they will need to make another report to us before April to make sure we know about the details. Mr. Dennis Leung, please. Well, I have only a brief question in relation to labeling or the use of designated bags for furniture. For example, it is obviously not ideal in PRH estates because sometimes people just dump furniture outside the refuse collection points in PRH estates. They may have affixed a stick label when they dumped the furniture, but some people may remove the sticker and put it onto their waste instead. How can you prevent that from happening? Thank you. Assistant Director. Well, we have put some features on the sticker. If it is removed, EPD, the words EPD will be left on the surface. So we're saying that a label should be affixed on a particular furniture. For a combo cabinet, one label would also be adequate. If it is a single unit, only one label is needed. Well, I think you need to do more publicity work, the administration. Otherwise, people may have paid, but it is not valid. All right, no further questions from you? Okay, Mr. Andrew Lam, again, I'll be brief. I'm not trying to criticize the government. I just think you do not know much about subdivided units. There are 6,000 to 7,000 households living in SDUs in industrial buildings. They would never allow you inside. I'm not trying to make it difficult for you, but I can arrange for a visit for you to go to subdivided units to see how it really is. Well, I would say that SDUs are not an expertise of the EPD, but the Housing Bureau should have figures or information on subdivided units. You should work with the housing department on this. I think that's what Mr. Andrew Lam meant as well. There are many subdivided units in different buildings, so the EPD should not be working at this alone. Okay, back to Mr. Andrew Lam. Back to your answers for Mr. Andrew Lam. Well, of course, subdivided units in industrial buildings are illegal. That's why we did not include them in our consideration. For SDUs in 3 new buildings, we will distribute bags to them, but for SDUs in industrial buildings, they are not legal. That's why we did not incorporate them into the equation. Well, I think it's very tragic because people may be fined, but it is through no fault of their own because they are forced to live in inadequate housing conditions. I don't blame you, but you need to have that in mind. Well, I think you may not be able to give a reply on this. You can perhaps give us a written reply in future. I think you can be more flexible because with the distribution of designated bags, we want to have them distributed to disadvantaged groups. For those living in subdivided units, they're most likely in that group. So please think about it. Can you do more with public funds? We won't blame you for asking for more money to do more good. So I hope that the government stance will change before April. Dr. Janice Ho, I'll give you 7 minutes to ask all questions. Well, no need. I just want to give a comment. I hope the administration would take into consideration unauthorized building works. The ratings and valuation department won't care about that. They won't carry out enforcement against unauthorized building works. They will only calculate the rateable value. And you are only responsible for collection of waste. You're only carrying out the work of the EPD. For those living in industrial buildings and you not taking them into consideration, then the problem is waste would be everywhere. I think you can be more flexible with your work. No matter where people live, as long as they dispose waste. If you have contractors conduct a survey and they are indeed living there, then distribute bags to them. And then there would not be any nuisance cost and you won't be faced with any problems. Of course, I won't blame you for doing that because in doing so, it doesn't mean that you're legalizing subdivided units. Well, excuse me. I think we need some time to deal with the 2 letters issued by Mr. Porter. So I am thinking that I'll leave 10 minutes for the administration to deal with them. So, Ms. Elizabeth Quad, you have a lot of questions. Apparently, I'll give you 2 more minutes. Oh, excuse me, Chair. Actually, I think it may be unfair to certain members of the public. For those receiving CSSA, they may already be living in PRH estates, so they will be distributed bags during the 6 months, yet they can still receive the $10 subsidy. So people may think it is unfair. The amount may be small, but the number of bags distributed may be a lot. So I think with big data, you should be able to tell who are receiving CSSA and at the same time living in PRH estates. So you won't have to distribute bags to them. Can you make sure there's an efficient allocation of public funds? Of course, I understand that you think this is very convenient, but we want to minimize waste of public funds. Well, I understand that, but for those people who are receiving CSSA, they may not be living in PRH estates. They may be living in 3 new buildings. For those living in 3 new buildings, it's hard for us to identify. No, think about it in another way. You just have to identify those who are receiving CSA and living in PRH estates. So we would have to distinguish those in receiving CSA who are living in PRH estates and from those who are not. Can you talk about what the $10 subsidy is for? Is to purchase the designated bags. For those receiving CSSA, if they have to purchase the designated bags, it may cause a burden for them. So for each household, for example, a 3-person household, the fees would be approximately $30. So it is actually quite clear the policy intent is to subsidize those in need to purchase designated bags, and those would be the ones who are receiving CSSA. So if they are already receiving $10 subsidy, why would you have to distribute bags to them if they are living in PRH estates? Some people may be concerned about this unfairness because this is double benefits, essentially. And I believe the government has the data on those who are receiving CSSA and at the same time living in public housing. Well, members, I think we need more data. If we are just simply talking about enhancing transparency, but at a very high cost, that the member wouldn't want that either. So I think the administration can provide figures on how much higher the cost would be if they have to take this targeted approach. I'll let you answer the questions of Ms. Quad. Well, I'll provide a written reply on the figures after the meeting. Well, lastly, I'll give time for the administration to respond to Mr. Jie's inquiries. There are multiple questions in the 2 letters. Some of the questions have already been answered. And in relation to the distribution arrangement, whether in the past 3 years you have distributed designated bags to private buildings and private housing estates, I think some other questions have been answered, including the first 3 questions in the first letter as well as the 5th question in the first letter. You only have to answer the 4th question in the first letter and the 2nd question in the 2nd letter. Now, as said earlier, we have answered the first 2 questions, and in relation to the 3rd question about food waste, in future we will have subsidies for the private housing developments to apply for installation of smart recycling bins, and if they have such bins installed, the FEHD would arrange for food waste to be collected. As for the fourth question, we have 21,000 trash bins, but it will be decreased in future. And depending on the hygiene condition and the flow of people in the area to decide on whether the number of trash bins has to be adjusted. And I think back then there was a committee in the LegCo examining the structure of new recycling trash bins, and starting from last November, in some parks we have installed such bins, and we have monitored the effectiveness of such bins. Once the review is conducted, we'll decide on whether new trash bins will be used, and we will continue to liaise with the FEHD on that. Thank you.
係啦，過往幾
On the distribution of designated bags, starting from 2015, we want to encourage people to reduce waste, so we started to work with a fund to roll out community involvement projects. And starting from 2018, we have rolled out pilot scheme with public housing estates, covering 1,200 such premises. About 2,300,000 households have been given these designated bags. Well, starting from the 1st of April next year, we're going to implement the charging scheme. We don't want the simulated bags and the real designated bags would get mixed up, so we will stop distributing these bags or dummy bags starting from the 1st of April. Members, do you think we need to invite the public to give their views on these three subsidiary legislations? I recommend that we ask the public to submit written views. Now we come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny of the subsidiary legislations. If there are views from the public, we ask them to provide written submissions. I don't think we need to invite members of the public to be here to give their views. Now we come to the clause-by-clause examination of waste disposal charges for this charging for Municipal Solid Waste Amendment Ordinance 2021 Commencement Notice 2023. Administration, please walk us through this notice. In August 2021, the Legislative Council passed the bill, and the former secretary has gazetted the notice in 2022 to commence certain provisions in relation to restrictions concerning designated labels and designated bags, and those provisions empower the secretary to adjust the construction waste disposal charges. This legal notice concerns the uncommenced provisions. We appoint the 1st of April 2024 to make these provisions come into operation, including penalty as well as provisions concerning defenses, etc. I'm not going to read out the provision one by one. We have tabled the legal notice to the Legislative Council for negative vetting. This is the first legal notice. Any views on the commencement date of the charging scheme? If not, we have completed the clause-by-clause examination of the first notice or first subsidiary legislation. We do not spot any issues in relation to legal drafting. Now we come to the clause-by-clause examination of the waste disposal charges for disposal of construction waste regulation amendment of schedules notice 2023. Administration, please walk us through this notice. We recommend to revise the schedule. We recommend to recommend the schedules under the regulation of charges for disposal of construction waste. As mentioned, we do not want people to deliberately mix MSW with construction waste for profit. That's why we want to adjust the landfill charge from $200 to $365 per ton so that the charges align with each other. And we are maintaining the $25 difference and to recover the cost. We have a 3-tier charging scheme because we want construction waste to be separated from other types of waste instead of going to the landfill sites. Legal advisor, we have taken a look at the subsidiary legislation and there are no issues spotted by us. I hope that you will continue to talk to the sector concerning the question raised by Mr. Kwok Wai Keung. We now come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny of the waste disposal specified requirements for designated bag and designated label amendment notice 2023. Administration, please walk us through this notice. Last year, the administration gazetted the notice under Cap 354, stipulating the requirements for designated bags and designated labels, as well as the specifications. This year we have relaunched the tender exercise as we have reviewed the specifications for the bags and labels, so we have to amend the law. In this notice, Schedules 1, 2 to 3 designate the color, design, and sizes of the designated bags, etc. And in this amendment, it covers the design of the designated bags. In Schedule 3, the material will be changed from high density PE, from low density PE to high density PE. And for designated bags with 70-liter capacity or lower, they will be printed with a different sign. And also the recycled materials content will be adjusted from 50% to not less than 20% of these designated labels, and this is reflected in the new tenders. Thank you. Members, well, I have a question about this. Is this QR code real? Will you change this QR code, or is this QR code the real QR code to be adopted on the designated bag? If you're going to change the QR code, you may have to amend the subsidiary legislation again. Please look at Schedule 2. Some parts will be changed and we have written it in the provision. Say the barcode and the QR code will be changed. So you do it through Gazette, is that right? Yes. I asked you whether the QR code included in this display is the authentic one, and you said it is. Those are the questions from me. I just wanted a clarification from the administration. If there are no further questions from members, I'll ask legal advisor to tell us whether there are specific things that we have to pay attention to. We've looked at this particular notice and we didn't spot any legal issues or drafting issues. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Junior's Ho. What is the production cost of this designated bag? I understand how much you're charging people, but I want to know the production cost for each bag. 1 penny or 2 pennies? Yes, it would just cost a few pennies. Apart from the 660 liters one, they will cost a few dollars. It will cost just 2 to 3 pennies for each of these bags. In terms of the logistics, say you know how many bags you need for each household, and say if there are fake bags in the market. How are you going to verify whether the bags are authentic or fake? Say if the fake ones are made of polyethylene as well. Say if the fake bags are in the same color with the same QR code on it, how are you going to distinguish them? And if these fake bags are to be sold at a much cheaper price, how are you going to plug the loopholes? There are certain features on the bags that allow us to tell whether they're authentic or not. We will take enforcement action at the downstream level, and in the upper level or the upper stream will also take enforcement actions. There are certain trademarks on the bags, and if people who sell bags without the authorization of the Director of Environmental Protection, they will be prosecuted by the Customs and Excise Department. Well, that can be fake trademarks. Will you collect statistics or figures on how many of such bags that you're getting each day so that you have an idea when the number suddenly increase? You're not going to dig out the bags from the landfill sites, are you? Well, you have the laws in place, but how are you going to combat illegal acts? Say some manufacturers may manufacture fake bags made of polyethylene, and it's hard to prosecute them, right? It's a policy issue. We have signed confidential agreements with 4 factories who are manufacturing these bags, or who are designing or printing these logos and patterns. Say a manufacturer may be able to produce fake bags with just a production cost of 50 cents. Well, if you're only going to have the confidentiality agreement signed with just 4 factories, and other factories may be able to produce fake bags as well, I don't think the administration is able to give a very convincing answer today. If we're not happy with the answers, perhaps we can follow up on the issue at the panel on environmental affairs. The 4 factories that are responsible for printing out the graphics, they do not know themselves the differences between the graphics that we send out to these 4 factories. If we notice, say, a batch of fake bags in the market, and if we find that it is the 4 factories that reveals or leaks the design to manufacturers, then we'll take action. Well, please talk to the members after the meeting about this. Well, there being no further questions, we have completed the clause-by-clause examination of the third subsidiary legislation.
按照一般嘅做
Next, based on usual practice, before the deadline for giving notice on the motion, and giving notice of motion to amend the 3 pieces of legislation, I will, on the 15th of November, LegCo meeting, move a motion to extend the scrutiny period so that we can report the deliberations of the subcommittee before the deadline. And I believe there is no other issues to discuss, so we don't need a next meeting. Well, actually, Mr. Andrew Lam. Sorry, I just want to ask something because we do not have another meeting scheduled. It is said if we have, because we are going to invite public views, but I don't think there will be. If there will, I will inform members of this and we'll see if a meeting needs to be called. Thank you.